Elementary music teacher friend, you love what you do, but you might feel unappreciated and, in fact, unseen some days. You may even feel like you're on a music teacher island and just want to connect with other music teachers who can relate to both your struggles and wins when it comes to teaching elementary music. I get you and understand completely the feelings you're having. That's why each and every week, the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast will provide you with solo and guest episodes that will help you realize you're not alone in your music teaching journey. Throughout each episode, my goal is for you to be able to walk away with actionable steps and ideas to help you feel like you're ready to take on the new week with whatever challenges may be thrown your way. Hi, I'm your host, Jessica Peresta, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're at home, in your car, in the shower, or wherever else you're listening, grab your cup of coffee or whatever other beverage is nearby and listen in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Do you have so much content to get through with your students but can't seem to fit it all in? Join me on Monday, June 28th for the Structuring Your Class Time workshop. In this workshop, you'll learn how you can structure your class time efficiently and effectively. We'll also discuss ways to not overwhelm yourself or your students as you head into the new school year. If you can't make it live, no worries. Still sign up so you can receive the replay that you can watch after the workshop is finished. Click on the link in the show notes or head to subscribepage.com/structuring class time efficiently to sign up. I'll see you there. Today, we are going to talk about determining how to structure your class time in the music room. I know a lot of you right now, the last thing you're thinking about is school at all. You're like, listen, I'm going to enjoy my summer. I'm not going to think about the school year at all until I have to. I get it. I totally do. So when you are able to, or you are ready to listen to this episode, then I am so excited to have you. But when you are ready to start thinking about the upcoming school year, the 2021-2022 school year, then talking about and thinking about structuring your class time and how it's going to look is important. So what I want you to first of all think about how you get your students in your classroom door, whether it is in person or virtually. I know a lot of you found yourselves last school year, or maybe you're still finishing up last school year as you're listening to this, you found yourself teaching both, like a hybrid situation, which is crazy. You quickly realized as you're in your classroom, whatever that situation looks like for you, that you are the teacher, that you are now responsible for filling up an entire class period of time with instruction. And it's like, okay, here we go. We're off to the races. I know that's exactly how I felt. Going from student teaching to having my own classroom immediately with all these eyeballs looking back at me. And I realized quickly, oh, wait, I'm the teacher. This is it. I'm in charge here. I'm the one responsible for coming up with content for this entire class period of time. And it feels like the time, for me it did, that clock is just going by so slowly, where the kids come in the room and the clock is just ticking by so slowly by the time it's time for them to leave. I'm like, oh my gosh, this class period felt like it just crawled by. Then I got into the habit of kind of over planning, where I was like, all right, no more dead space. I'm going to have everything planned out from the minute they come in the door to the minute my students leave. And I'd be rushing to have them put up their instruments, rushing, oh my gosh, our teacher's here, run to the door and let's leave. It became like a circus. So finding that happy balance of, okay, there is going to be some dead space and that's okay. And we're going to talk about that today. And also where not over planning, how to kind of find that balance of what works for you when it comes to structuring your class periods, because what works for you isn't going to work for anyone else. And also what works for you isn't going to, like what works for one grade level isn't going to work for another grade level. Like what works for kindergarten won't work for fifth grade. And also, let's say you have like 6 fifth grade classes, you may have to structure it a little bit differently based on the different classes you see of a particular grade level. So maybe you have found yourself trying to fill up every spare minute, kind of like I just shared with you, or maybe you find that you always have extra time at the end of class. You know, maybe there's those like even if it's 5 extra minutes where, before the kids leave your classroom and you're like, oh my gosh, like there's so much space left. What do I do with them? It can be a bit tricky and feel like you're trying to put puzzle pieces together is how I think of it. With anything with teaching music, there are like so many moving parts. And I've always thought about it like a jigsaw puzzle. You got, we talked about classroom management last week. You got so many different puzzles where classroom management, assessment, the planning part, the teaching part, the structuring your class time, organizing lesson plans, like all the different things. There's so many other things I didn't mention, by the way, but there's like jigsaw puzzle pieces. And when you put them, when you try to put two puzzle pieces together that don't match, it's kind of like, it's just awkward trying to fit them together. It's when they all start falling into place is where everything just starts kind of running smoothly. And structuring your class period and the class time you have with your students is one of those jigsaw puzzles. I would say it's a few jigsaw puzzle pieces that fit together. And when they fit together great, then the puzzle starts kind of falling into place the way it's supposed to. And you start seeing the bigger picture forming. Let's talk about determining how to structure your class time in the music room. And I'm going to talk about a few things today. So the first thing is to think about how long you see your students each class period and how often you see them. For some of you, it might be once a week for 30 minutes. For others of you, it might be twice a week, maybe for an hour. I also know there are some of you who see your students maybe every other week. So thinking about, first of all, how often you see your students and for how long you see them when you see your students is the first thing to consider. And it's going to look unique for each school and for each grade level sometimes. So what I mean by that is kindergarten, I know one time my schedule looked like this, which I don't know how this happened, it just did. Where kindergarten, I saw twice a week for 20 minutes. And then for my every other grade level was once a week for 45 minutes. But I know every situation is different. I also know there's music teachers where you see your students on maybe like for 4 weeks, and then the next group of students for 4 weeks, especially during COVID. That's kind of how it looked a little bit. So think about how long you see your students and how often, because some of you will see your students more often than others who see your students a shorter amount of time or not as often. So that's the first thing to consider when it comes to structuring your class time. So let's move right into the next thing, which is to consider the age of your students. The age of your students are really, and I've heard others give this rule of thumb as well, and it's one that I followed myself, which has worked out wonderfully. Think about the age of your students. So when you see your kindergarten students who are 5 and 6 years old, you will change up what you do every 5 to 6 minutes. So base how often you keep things moving for the age of the students. So what I mean by that is it's not about having a new song or an activity you're presenting to your kids every 5 to 6 minutes. I'm not sitting here telling you in a 45-minute class period to have 9 songs or 9 activities planned and ready to go. No. What I mean is, and I'm going to give you an example. So if you're teaching a song or a concept, maybe, so I'm going to hold up my fingers so you can see. Maybe, and if you're listening to the podcast, just listen as I'm holding up my fingers. Okay. So maybe you are presenting a new song or activity. So as you're doing that, maybe the very first thing you're doing is having your students listen to the song. Maybe by you singing it, or maybe they're listening to a recording. Okay. Maybe next you're speaking the words of the song or the activity while they pat the steady beat. Okay. Maybe you tell them next, okay, now I want you to find the beat on your body. It doesn't have to be patting the beat. You can clap it and explain to them. Maybe you're doing this activity after you've already covered steady beat with your kinders. And then the next thing you're going to say, all right, now we're going to stand up and we're going to move our bodies to the beat. And we're going to move around the room or whatever it might be. Then they may practice echo singing after you, and then they may sing the song with you. I'm just giving out some examples here, okay? This is not something you have to do this way every time, but with kindergartners especially, the more you keep things moving, the less time they have to get squirrely and to bother their neighbor, and they don't have time to this ties directly into classroom management, by the way, but they don't have time to kind of get distracted because you're keeping them moving. You're keeping class time moving, which is one of my best classroom management tips, is the more you keep class time moving, the less time there is for distractions from the kids. So those are some things you can do. And then also, like, you may be doing movement, you might be adding instruments, maybe you're going to read a story that goes right into that song or activity. Like I said, it doesn't mean you're teaching a new song or concept every 5 to 6 minutes. You are just changing up what you do with the students every 5 to 6 minutes for ages of 5 to 6 years old. Now, with fifth graders who are 10 and 11 years old, you won't be needing to change up what you're doing as often. But you're also considering the different classes. There's not a cookie cutter approach. And if you've done one thing at one school and maybe you're starting at a new school, you maybe won't be able to do things the exact same way because you're going to have a new crew of students. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is remembering when your students enter and exit the classroom and to think about the transitions that happen throughout the class time. This ties in directly to how to structure your class time. One thing I failed to think about, I would say, gosh, my first 3 years of teaching, maybe it didn't take me that long to figure it out, but it took me a while, was the fact that when students came in my room, I didn't really think of that part. I didn't really think about what I would do when they came in the classroom the first maybe couple minutes. I would just be like, all right, let's all go in. And it would just be like a stampede. Quickly realized I was not going to be able to work very well. Same thing when it came time to leave. I would over plan and not allow time for my students to wrap up what we were doing, allow time for cleanup, but also allow time to ask them questions to make sure they understood what was going on and to get them lined up at the door. So allowing times for entering and exiting the classroom, yes, even if it's in a virtual classroom setting, allowing times for your students to enter the virtual classroom and to exit the virtual classroom is super important as well. But also wanting to talk about transitions that happen during the class time as well. You need to also know that there's going to be so many transitions happening. And of course, it's going to depend on what the lesson is that day. Are you using instruments? If you are, you need to know that there's going to take some time and you need to have procedures in place for how to get the instruments, what to do when the students get the instruments. Are they passing the instruments around the room? Are they sharing with a partner? What is the procedure for all the things that need to happen? And then allowing time to put the instrument away. I also want to say this, allow extra time for if a student does not put an instrument away the correct way, what are you going to do about that? You need to allow for those little moments, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but what's going to happen if they don't put it away correctly? Are you going to have them come back to their seat and try it again? You need to allow for extra time. Things like that are going to happen when it comes time to transitions. So let's talk about that. Well, thinking about how to structure your class period, knowing how you want your students to get into the classroom and having them line up to leave is important. And this will look differently for each grade level, but also for each class as well. And I'll say it once and I'll say it again. What works for one class will not work for another class. It's just not. So you can say, I'm going to do this all the same way with all my fourth grade classes, but you're going to have one, maybe two fourth grade classes. You can't do things the same way. They're not going to come in the classroom the same way the other fourth grade classes do. You're going to need some extra time to line those kids up because there may be a talkative class, or you're going to be able to do extra things with them. So thinking about those things, you're not going to be able to do it the same way for each class that's in the same grade level. Allowing time for transitions between learning activities is important to keep in mind, like I just said. And look at your curriculum map, whatever that is that you follow, whichever curriculum map you've chosen to follow. Maybe you follow a couple, maybe you've created your own, whatever it might be. Maybe you're using one I've created. So when you're looking at your curriculum map, it's important not to overplan. And I think this is just something that comes with doing. It is something that comes with when I get asked about lesson planning. This is something that I get asked about a lot. For me personally, it just took time and patience and adjusting and figuring it out. So at first I wouldn't plan enough, and then I would overplan, and then I kind of found that perfect sweet spot where I was like, all right, this is what it is. But my suggestion at first is, when I say not to overplan, at first have more than enough ready to go instead of not enough. Then you'll start slowly seeing, all right, I have way too much and I'm not getting through everything. Because that, I know if you're anything like my type A personality, it stressed me out when I didn't get through everything I had planned because I had planned too much. Don't let it stress you out if you don't get through everything, because that's okay. It's okay to see on your lesson plan, if you're only at like 3 or 4 in the objectives and you have like 5, 6, 7 ready to go and you're not there yet, it's okay. Just move that to a different day and then not plan as much the next week. So look at your curriculum map and then plan lessons following that, and leave open space for transitions to happen between activities in the classroom at the beginning and the end of the class period. And also if you are not planning enough, let's say you are having that open space at the end of class when it's time to wrap up, and you've gotten through everything on your plan, and you're like, oh my gosh, I still have them 5, 10, 15 more minutes. What do I do? I suggest always kind of having a list of filler activities where you can easily pull from something and put it in place, a story ready to go, an activity ready to go, some kind of end of the end of the lesson plan song you could do. Maybe it is some kind of technology, a game your students could do together as a class or individually. Maybe you don't have time to get out all their Chromebooks and their iPads. Maybe it's something you could do as a class together. Something quickly you can pull if you have extra time at the end of the class period that you can easily implement, and just make yourself a list of some songs or activities that you can have as filler activities to do if you do have extra space at the end of a class period. And the last thing I want to talk about is just knowing, which I mentioned earlier, but know that interruptions will happen in the music room. This is something, and actually when I wrote my book that came out last summer, which is crazy to think about, but when I wrote my book, Make a Note, this is something I mentioned in there because nobody told me that interruptions are going to happen in the music room. And I'm talking about every tiny little interruption you could imagine. I'm just going to keep it real with you guys. I had students pee in my classroom where they didn't even tell me they had to go to the restroom. I would look down and be like, oh, that happened. Or throwing up, or intercom's going off, or there's a fire drill nobody had told me would happen, or gosh, every other, a mallet breaks in the middle of class period and then someone's stressed out about it and they're like, I can't use the stick, and you have to stop to figure out what to do. These little interruptions happen all the time. So nobody tells you about that when you're figuring out how to structure your class time. Yes, you can plan for the entering. You can plan for the students exiting. You can plan for transitions happening throughout the class period. You can plan the right amount of activities and songs, but then there's going to be interruptions, and that's okay. Allow for those to happen. Yes, you don't know when they're going to happen, but just know that interruptions are going to happen in the music room. These will be external interruptions. What I mean by that is the fire drills, like I mentioned earlier, or there's an assembly that was called last minute in a typical school year. I know COVID year was not the same, but things like that will happen. And then, or this is my favorite, a whole class is out for a field trip and nobody told me about it, and you're sitting there with a whole plan ready to go, and you're like, wait a minute, where are they? And then you're going to have internal interruptions, like I just mentioned, where kids are getting sick or mallets break or whatever else happens. You guys know. And so just knowing that these are going to happen and preparing yourself mentally for that, if you just know ahead of time that interruptions are going to happen, will help you tremendously with structuring your class time, where it's just not going to stress you out. If you leave that open space just to know that interruptions are going to naturally happen, and then you have those filler activities ready to go, then you will not be as stressed out when things will occur. They just will. And it won't happen every class period, but there are going to be things that naturally happen and come up. So if you are still wanting to talk about structuring your class period more and more as next school year happens, how to do it, the ins and outs of it, and how exactly do you go about doing that? I will go into way more detail in the Structuring Your Class Time workshop that's coming up on Monday, June 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central Time. We'll talk about why having a structure is important, how to structure your class time effectively and efficiently, which we touched on a little bit today, why being flexible matters, and where the overwhelm comes from and how to combat this. So simply head to subscribepage.com/structuring class time efficiently to sign up. Or if you're listening to this on the podcast, it will be in the show notes as well. Well, hey there. Thank you so much for listening into the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. There is an exclusive Facebook group just for listeners of this podcast and any elementary music teacher called the Elementary Music Teacher Community Facebook Group. Come on over and join us there, where we have conversations around the podcast episodes and encourage each other each and every week. And also head to my website, thedomesticmusician.com. I have some free resources there that you can download to help you gain traction in your classroom today today, as well as the blog and the membership site and all kinds of other goodies to help you keep going in your music teaching journey. I cannot wait to keep connecting with you and encouraging you and spurring you on in your journey of teaching elementary music. Hang in there, have an amazing week, and I will see you soon.